Warning: this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. While walking through the woods at night, I encountered a small group of naked people performing a human sacrifice. Rangers, forest workers, hunters, and other woods people of Reddit, what is your scary experience in the woods that you still can't explain? I've lived in the Smokies most of my life. Anywhere I've lived in the Smokies, I've been completely surrounded by woods, naturally. One night at like 1 AM I was sitting on my porch drinking a beer. If you haven't lived out here, during the summertime, nature is loud. It isn't quiet. Cicadas humming, frogs belching, etc. It's like the ultimate white noise. While I was drinking my beer, I had noticed that everything in the woods had gone quiet. Which is pretty easy to notice when you live here, because that doesn't happen. Suddenly, I heard the most terrifying noise I had ever heard about, I think maybe a good 30 or 40 meters away from me. It was a loud, shrieking, literally blood-curdling scream like shrill. It sounded non-human. It wasn't a mountain lion, because I've heard them before, and they're rare in the area I lived. I stood up, audibly said nope, and walked the fuck inside. That was the one and only time that ever happened. I still live in the same house and still drink the same beer on the same porch. I've shared this story before. We have a camp that we visit during the hunting months and about every other weekend in between that. To get to our camp, you have to turn off of a major road onto a gravel road, drive about a mile, then turn onto another gravel road for about a half mile. It's set between a few other camps, plus some residents that live out there. It's quiet, for the most part. There are some coyotes and bobcats. Bobcats are the worst due to their terrible scream. It sounds like a woman crying for help. There has also been a black panther and wild dogs. 2013 we were at the camp for Thanksgiving. We hunted, fished, cooked, drank, all that good camp stuff. On night, we are sitting around a fire, swapping funny stories and just listening to the silence of the woods. As we are talking, we all hear, "Help me." At first, we thought it was a bobcat. We listened some more, and heard it again. It was a man's voice yelling "help me" repeatedly. Now, our first instinct was to grab our guns. Second was to go towards the voice, but you never know what you will encounter in the woods. It was dark and cold. The hunters knew the area very well. We called the police and explained everything to the responding officers. The weird part was that we never once heard it while the officers were with us. Not once. The officers left and we heard the man again, repeating "help me." About half an hour later, the officers came back and we didn't hear any call for help. Again, silence. We all decided it was best to go inside our camp for the night. We never did find out anything. I've only been back to the camp once since then. Really freaked me out. Kinda creepy thing happened to me when I was a student forester this summer. So, the forest I was working in was about 20 km from the nearest town, which contained around 1200 people, and we usually set out for whatever task we have to do in the forest at around 7 AM. So we are at the forest at around 7:30 AM and we are about 12 km up the road when we turn a corner very slowly and see what I initially thought to be a weird looking bush or statue, but it was in fact a person sitting on a carved out stump on the side of the road, just sitting there. What really threw me off was the fact that this person had a parka on and a balaclava underneath it in the middle of summer. We drove by this person real slow and he lifted a hand to wave slowly as we drove past, and it was just super creepy. Never saw them again after that, but it did make going out on excursions a little more uneasy sometimes when alone. Not my story, but my younger sister's, early 20s. She was in Colorado last year and went hiking with her friend. The plan was to hike up the mountain, stop midway and camp, then finish the hike the next morning. They started their hike and stopped for camp midway. She said it started dumping rain that night, which meant the top would most likely be snow. The next morning they continued their hike, but it started getting complicated. Her friend only wore Chaco sandals and not proper hiking boots as they didn't expect the snow. They stopped at a creek and were deciding if they wanted to turn back on account they weren't prepared properly when they heard a faint "help me." They both stood still. They heard it again. They decided to follow up the creek to the woman's voice. They got to a clearing that was covered in snow and found a woman laying in it in basic athletic clothing, leggings, light pullover jacket, and athletic shoes. My sister said her legs were swollen, discolored and had nasty cuts on them. My sister asked her how long she had been out there, and the woman said only a few hours. My sister was like, okay, we need to get you down this mountain. The woman was like, no, I need to go up the mountain, that's where my car is parked. My sister was like, no, there is no driving access at the top of the mountain, which was a sign that this woman was confused. They get her down the mountain and my sister just kept saying how confused this woman was. They get to the bottom and they find this woman's car. My sister couldn't get cell service to call 911 during this BTW. Anyways, my sister tells this woman she's going to drive her to the hospital, but the woman is standing strong that she would just like to go back to her bed and breakfast. My sister takes her there while driving this woman's car. Once the woman is at the bed and breakfast, she thanks them and goes in. My sister spoke to the owners and was like, you have to call a medic. She is severely confused and not acting normal. They call a medic and transport her to a hospital. Turns out this woman is from Chicago, has low blood pressure, and it was her first time ever hiking a mountain. She was also alone. She had passed out during her hike, then it dumped snow on her. She was hypothermic and only thought she'd been out for a few hours. She was out overnight in the dark, cold and alone. I couldn't imagine the terror she must have felt. Anyways, my sister went and saw her at the hospital and the woman thanked her for saving her life. They still likely keep in touch. Friend and I were hiking in the woods. He was at the camp and I went to check on things about half a mile away. Suddenly, as if someone flipped a switch, the woods became silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, no birds. Just the most eerie silence I've experienced. After a few minutes, it suddenly went back to normal forest noises. Thinking I must have had a seizure or temporary deafness or something, I hurry back to camp, only to see friend standing there with a confused / scared look on his face. I must have had a similar look, because he immediately asked if I heard the silence. We tried to come up with an explanation, but absolute silence in the woods seems impossible. Even more so that it was so sudden. I love to share a story my uncle told. TLDR at the bottom. In 1992 he owned about 150 acres in a remote area of East Tennessee. On this land he had a large fishing pond and a stream running through it, and he used to leave lines out at night to pull in big catfish. This pond was accessible by 2 small game trails through thick patches of woods, and he would need to drive to the trail entrances from his house near the front of the property and walk about a half mile in with his gear and nothing but a headlamp for light. This was something he did pretty often, and my uncle was a lover of the outdoors, so this was business as usual for him. Vietnam vet as well. Anyway, this particular night in July 1992, he went down to the pond at about 9:30 p.m. to check his lines. As he was doing so, he heard a loud splash and assumed it was a fish jumping. He carried on with what he was doing and then heard a low, guttural groan and what he described as monkeys flighting just on the other side of the pond. It was about 70 yards across. Multiple loud splashes occurred, and he also heard a loud crash in the woods just yards away to his left. He talked about how he immediately felt a sense of panic and was attempting to get visuals using his headlamp, but whatever was producing these sounds was behind tree cover. He said that the woods then erupted in continued sounds of fighting monkeys and he opted to drop his gear and run down the trail toward his truck. Apparently, even in his adrenaline-fueled state, he could hear footfall on his left as he was being hunted. He got to his truck and hauled ass out of there to the road and back to his home, which mind you, sits on the property about 6 miles away. He went inside and locked every window and door, grabbed a gun, and stayed up and vigilant the entire night, but nothing more occurred. He called my dad the next day, who sort of just laughed it off. Well, for my uncle, whatever he experienced scared him so badly that he put his land up for sale and sold it a few months later. Until he died in 2017, he would maintain that he believes that he walked into a group of Sasquatch and they erupted in territorial displays to get him out of there. He never enjoyed the outdoors after that. This wasn't a man who I took for a liar. TLDR, my Vietnam vet/outdoorsman uncle claims he was chased out of the woods by a clan of Sasquatch, and it scared him so badly he sold the property. I was hiking with my family in a small nature reserve near here. All of a sudden we hear large crashing and branch snapping sounds. We turn behind us and see taking off from the cliff the biggest bird I have ever seen. But things about it looked off, like the legs and length of the body. Not to mention it had a really long neck and a strange shaped head. I'll never be sure what that was. We weren't in an area known for large birds. The biggest we get here in NJ are like hawks. This thing looked like it had a 40+ foot wingspan and was bigger than any hawk I've ever seen. Not mine, but my mom's and cousin. My mom swears there is a werewolf creature around the Camp Douglas/Fort McCoy area of Wisconsin. In the late 90s, mom and boyfriend were driving on the frontage road alongside the interstate between Tomad and Sparta. It was a full moon night in the fall. I call it a frontage road, but it's sometimes visible to the interstate and other times not because of trees. What they think is a exceptionally large man runs out of the trees on all fours and leaps over the chain link and barbed wire fence around some military area. This fenced-in area has a stone entranced wall with a sign stating what it's for, and the installation it belongs to. The thing has ears like a human, more like a dog, and leaps over the chain link barbed wire fence and disappears into more woods. They don't stop, but freak out asking the others in the car if they saw whatever it was. About 5 years later, my dad's cousin, didn't know my mom, broken family reasons, is talking to me about how he and his GF were on that frontage road driving out to look at a home they wanted to buy. It was dusk in winter. They come close to this stone entrance thing, and something is on top of it. They slowed and looked at it. They said it was a werewolf sitting on its haunches on the stone wall, and it looks right at them. Its ears move back like a dog's do when it's thinking about taking off after something. His wife screams, and he floors it away. They never stopped to see the house, just made it back onto the interstate. What gets me is the two sightings happened years apart, and at least 6 total adults saw it. Some of them, I think, would just love to say they saw something like this, but not all of them are this fanciful. Nevertheless, when I had to go to Fort McCoy to get my CAC and the group of us from my employer got lost on the way in this wooded area, I couldn't help but look into the woods just in case I saw it.